Let's dive into one of the great ironies of the Cold War. It's a story about how a series of high-stakes meetings, summits that were supposed to build bridges and keep the peace, somehow ended up building a wall instead. I mean, how on earth does that happen? It sounds completely backward, right? You'd think that more talking would mean less conflict. But in this intense, high-stakes chess match over the city of Berlin, every single diplomatic move and every failure just pushed the world one step closer to that infamous concrete barrier. So what went wrong? Well, to understand this, you gotta go back to the root of the problem for the Soviet Union. And it all came down to this one simple but massive issue: a brain drain. Their satellite state, East Germany, was literally hemorrhaging its best and brightest. We're talking doctors, engineers, scientists, teachers, all fleeing to the West. And the scale of this was just mind-boggling. By 1958, a staggering 3 million East Germans had already voted with their feet and left for West Germany. Now, this wasn't just embarrassing for the communists, it was an economic disaster waiting to happen. They absolutely had to stop the bleeding. But why were so many people desperate to get out? Well, you just have to look at the two Germanys side by side. On one hand, you had West Germany. Thanks to American martial aid, its economy was booming. It was a democracy with a high standard of living. Then you had East Germany, struggling under a very unpopular communist regime with constant shortages of even basic stuff. For an East German, that open border in Berlin wasn't just a line on a map. It was an escape hatch to a whole different life. So this is where the Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev decides enough is enough. In November of '58, he throws down the gauntlet, a blunt ultimatum. Western troops have 6 months to get out of West Berlin. His plan was simple: get control of the whole city and slam that escape hatch shut for good. Of course, the West said no way, and just like that, the world was on the brink. But instead of jumping straight into a war, thankfully, they decided to talk. The first summit in Geneva didn't really solve anything, but hey, at least they were talking. And then, a few months later, at a place called Camp David, it really seemed like maybe, just maybe, a breakthrough was actually possible. This meeting between Khrushchev and President Eisenhower was, well, it was surprisingly positive. They met at the president's private retreat, and that relaxed, informal setting created what the newspapers started calling the Camp David spirit. It really felt like a thaw in the Cold War was happening. And this wasn't just about good vibes. It actually produced real results. Khrushchev did something amazing. He agreed to withdraw his ultimatum on Berlin. The tension just dropped almost overnight. And they even scheduled another big summit in Paris to keep the momentum going. For that brief moment, it looked like diplomacy was actually going to work. But that hope, that fragile Camp David spirit, was about to come crashing down to earth. And I mean that quite literally. As the world was looking ahead to Paris, a single, shocking event was about to shatter everything. I mean, just picture the timing. The leaders are packing their bags for Paris. The world is watching, hoping for a real solution for Berlin, maybe even a treaty to ban nuclear tests. And then, just days before they're set to meet, boom, an American U-2 spy plane is shot down deep inside Soviet territory. And not only that, they capture the pilot, a guy named Gary Powers, alive. The timing could not have been worse. Khrushchev felt betrayed, he was publicly humiliated, and he was furious. So when they finally get to Paris, you can imagine the atmosphere in the room has completely changed. Khrushchev stands up and demands a public apology from President Eisenhower. But Eisenhower refuses. His point was, come on, we both know everyone spies on everyone. But for Khrushchev, the damage was done. He couldn't just let this go. And that was it. After just one day, Khrushchev dramatically storms out of the summit and the whole thing collapses. The Camp David spirit was completely dead. And the Berlin problem? It was right back where it started. But now, it was personal. So, a year goes by. Tensions are still incredibly high. They agree to one last-ditch effort at diplomacy, a meeting in Vienna in June of '61. But things were different now. The United States had a new, young, and relatively inexperienced president, John F. Kennedy. You really have to get inside Khrushchev's head here. He looked at Kennedy and saw a kid. And not just that, Kennedy was coming off the massive, humiliating failure of the Bay of Pigs invasion in Cuba. The Soviet leaders smelled blood in the water. He thought he could bully this new president. So when they met in Vienna, Khrushchev just came out swinging. He slapped that Berlin ultimatum right back on the table, trying to intimidate Kennedy. But Kennedy knew he had to look strong, so he absolutely refused to back down. He stood his ground, and as soon as the summit was over, he went home and called for a massive increase in military spending. And that's the chilling part about Vienna. The summit didn't just fail, it made everything so much worse. The leaders met face to face, and the only result was more threats and a new arms buildup. The road of diplomacy had hit a dead end. Both sides were now just digging in, preparing for whatever came next. Which brings us right back to that central question. Just 2 months after that disastrous Vienna summit, construction crews started putting up barbed wire in Berlin. That wire would soon become the Berlin Wall. With the talks having failed so completely, and with neither superpower willing to give an inch, had Khrushchev been backed into a corner? Was a physical wall the only move he felt he had left to stop that brain drain for good? It's a pretty unsettling thought to end on.